Okay, so we have filled out the truth tables for some statements where they were completely symbolic. We had no idea what P and Q and R represented, okay? But keep that in mind. We didn't have to know what P and Q and R represented in order to make sense of what we were doing, okay? Again, there's no emotion involved. There's no opinion involved. It's completely objective, all right? So what we're going to do now is we're going to take it up one more notch back to where we're going to have a statement, but we're going to turn it into something that is removed from all context, okay? We're going to evaluate that statement and then figure out what the logical conclusion is, okay? So, a sign in a business district, something I've actually seen before, that's where I got this example. Parking in a loading zone will result in your car being towed and a $200 fine. So, what are the simple statements? And we need to assign every one of them a variable. Okay, so what are the different things that will happen? Well, there's actually 3 of them, okay? One of them is about parking in a loading zone, okay? You could park in a loading zone. Another one of them is your car is towed, okay? And yet another one is this $200, different color, this $200 fine. Okay, so there's 3 different things going on. And so we're going to go ahead and write those out in terms of simple statements. You can use whatever letters you want whenever you're doing this, but I will say traditionally it's P, Q, and R. Okay, P, Q, and R. So P is going to be the statement. It's about parking in a loading zone. Now you can't say parking in a loading zone. That's not a statement. Okay, parking in a loading zone. And you'd be like, what's going on? So it would be like you park in a loading zone. Okay, because it actually does have to be a statement that makes sense by itself. All right, Q would be the next one. So I'm just going to go in order. We don't need the will result in, but like your car is towed. That's really what happens. Okay, so your car is towed. And then R, what's the other thing? Well, you get a $200 fine. So I'm going to say you are fined $200. Okay, you can say you have to pay a $200 fine. I don't care. Just kind of, again, make sure it's a sentence that makes sense. Don't just say $200 fine. That doesn't count. Okay, all right, now we're going to write the statement in symbols. Now, remember, we've got and, or, if then, if and only if, and we have not. Okay, nowhere in this do we have a not. Okay, there's no not that comes into place. We don't need a negation, but we do have this phrase will result in. Well, what is that? Is that and? No, it's not an and. Okay, it's not an or. It's not like this or this. The will result in is really an if then. This is like saying if you park in a loading zone, then the result is your car gets towed and you're fined $200. Okay, so if what? If you park in a loading zone. So there's your P, and then our if then arrow. Okay, and then what happens? Is it one thing that happens or is it 2 things that happen? Well, it's 2 things that happen, right? Your car is towed, Q, and you're fined $200, R. And since it's both of those things, as a consequence, I'm going to put that in parentheses to just show that it's both of these things. Okay, that would show that those go together. This one thing, parking in a loading zone, means then these 2 things together, parentheses together, happen. Okay, once we've written our statement in symbols, then what we're going to do is go to our truth table. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to do real quick is I'm just going to rewrite our statement here so that it's front and center, so it's not left on the bottom of the next page. Okay, so we're going to make our table. So again, we've got a P, a Q, and an R, and we filled out, again, P, 4 trues, 4 falses, Q, 2 and 2, R, 1 and 1 and 1. Okay, so what is the next thing we would need to figure out? Okay, using our like order of operations. Okay, well, the next thing we're going to need to do is take care of our parentheses, Q and R. And so I'm going to make a column here for Q and R. Okay, so now you're starting to see like how it is I came up with those headings when I did this, all right? So we've got Q and R. So again, all we need to look at, all we need to look at is the Q column and the R column. Nothing else, okay? Just the Q column and the R column. When is an and statement true? An and statement is true when both of the simple statements are true. So what I'm looking for is a true, true that are highlighted, and that gives me a true. Okay, so I've got a true, true. That gives me, let me turn off the highlighter, turn on the pen. So I've got a true, true, that gives me a true. A true false would be false. A false true would be false. A false false would be false. There I've got another true, true. That gives me true. And then all the rest, again, have a false somewhere. And so those are all going to be false results for the Q and R. Okay, now I'm erasing what's here. Okay, and I want you to look at the pieces now of what we have. Okay, so looking at the pieces, we have our column for Q and R. We have a column for P. The only thing we need to do next is take care of this conditional. So what we want is P implies, or if P, then Q and R. So what columns do we need to use? Well, we need to use the P column, and we need to use our Q and R column. Those are the only two columns we need, okay? Now, remember, you can look back, okay, or use a little index card or whatever you've got in front of you. When it comes to a conditional, okay, an if-then, the only time the conditional is false is when you have a true, if true, then false, okay? If true, then false gives you a false result. It's the second row in that table. So that's what I'm going to look for. I'm going to look for those ones that stand out as different. If true, then false. So here I've got a true and a false. Right below that, I've got a true and a false. Below that one, I've got a true and a false. And the rest of the way, I don't have an if P is true, then Q and R is false. So those three that I've got those dots by, those are all of the ones that turn out to be a false result. The rest, because they're not an if true, then false, gives us false. These are all true. Okay, so our truth table is filled out. Now, since we have context, we can do a little bit more than what we could do when we didn't have context before. So let's look at a couple of questions here. I'm going to use some highlighting to make that happen. All right, so we're going to start with a green highlighter. All right, if you park in a loading zone, okay, so you park in a loading zone, that means that part is true, right? You park in a loading zone. Your car is towed. That's true. But you don't get a fine. So remember that R was our statement, you get a fine. So in other words, our R is false. Okay, so you parked in a loading zone. In other words, P is true. Your car is towed. Q is true. You don't get a fine. R is defined as you get a fine. R is false. Is the statement true or false? So we need to go up to our table and find where P is true, Q is true, and R is false. We've got a true, true, false. That is right here. True, true, false. Okay. Is the statement, the final statement, true or false? The final statement is false. Okay. So in other words, if you parked in a loading zone and you got towed, but you didn't get a fine, their sign is not true. Okay. They weren't following what they said they were going to do. All right, let's look at E, okay? If you don't park in a loading zone, so in other words, statement P about parking in a loading zone is false because we said P was you park in a loading zone. Well, we didn't, so you park is false, okay? Your car is towed. Q, we're saying is true. You got towed. And you got a fine, so R is true because R is defined as you get a fine. Is the statement true or false? So again, going back up to the table, we want to look for false, true, true. False, true, true. That's this one right here, okay? False, true, true. The result is true. Okay, so you didn't park in a loading zone, but your car got towed and you got a $200 fine. Is the statement true or false? It's still a true statement, okay? I know that sounds weird, and that's exactly why we take the context out, okay? Maybe you parked in a loading zone. Maybe you parked in front of you didn't park in a loading zone. Maybe you double parked. Maybe you parked in front of a fire hydrant, okay? That doesn't mean your car still can't be towed and you get a $200 fine. There was just another reason for that, okay? I know it's weird, which is exactly why we don't think about what the words mean. We go to P's and Q's and R's. All right, last but not least, okay, so if you park in a loading zone, so we've got P is true. Your car isn't towed, so Q is false. And you don't get a fine. Q is false, okay? You didn't get a fine. Is the statement true or false? So again, going back up and looking for where we have true, false, false, that's our fourth row there. And if we go across, we find out that the statement itself is false. Okay, so if you parked in a loading zone and those two things didn't happen, you didn't get towed and you didn't get fined, then basically, from a logical standpoint, their thing is false. Now, real world, you probably just didn't get busted, right? You stay there long enough, you're gonna get towed and fined. But in this case, their claim would be false.